Hello, people. How's it going? For my shiny head. Oh, anyway. I don't know. I actually wore this thing crooked, I guess. That's okay. Anyway, I like this book. I just finally got done reading it about a week ago. I did like this book. I do recommend this book. He was an interesting guy. He definitely wasn't boring. He was definitely an interesting fellow. I'm going to read the book review I did on my blog site. I'll make comments, of course, as I go along. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, 1859 to 1930. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland, lived quite a life. Well known for being the creator of Sherlock Holmes, whom he hated, and he did, and really wished he could kill off and it would stay dead and stay away. I'm embellishing, but he did. He created this wonderful character who just took over. Everything else he wrote just never amounted to anything, and he didn't like it. I'm turning off. Well, whom he hated and really wished to kill off and stay killed off, but Doyle will always be the man who created the greatest detective of them all. He was indeed a writer, doctor, spiritualist. Let's see, a defender of those he felt wrongly accused of crimes, and cleared the name of the Indian George Odyssey, accused of mutilating animals, and friend of Harry Houdini. George Odyssey, he was an Indian. Animals were mysteriously being found, mutilated. Prejudices do not go away. Oh, look, the Indian guy must be doing it. Let's accuse him. Let's arrest him. He wrote letters to Conan Doyle. He wrote letters to Conan Doyle saying, please help me. Please. You wrote Sherlock Holmes. You can figure this out. You can clear my name. And he did. Conan Doyle did it. He cleared the man's name. Actually, he did it twice to somebody else, too. But that's very well written in the book. Let's see. He was a friend of Harry Houdini, who 1874 to 1926, before he died suddenly. Him and Houdini had an off-and-on relationship until it finally just went off. That's more like when he was dealing with the spiritualism in his life, and he was a staunch spiritualist. And Harry Houdini was spending most of his time saying this is a bunch of nonsense. They had a rivalry. The book does an excellent job of explaining all this, of showing the give and take, the debates they would have, the problems they would have, and the eventual destruction of a friendship. With they had a falling out, and he was a believer in fairies. He was. Those pictures those girls took? He believed they were real. Despite the obvious, he really, even when they were proven fake, he just staunchly refused to believe that they just weren't real. He was a very stubborn man. He was a very stubborn Scotsman. And he was just convinced that they were real. It didn't matter what anyone said. I believe they're real. And he would get very angry. He was quite the personality. He was quite bombastic when he had to be. While in his political attempts, served as a wars correspondent in Egypt in 1896. If you know anything about Winston Churchill, the book he wrote about the battle in the Sudan, Amadran. He was there with Churchill. He was a correspondent there. That's the battle they're talking about when the war correspondent in Egypt, 1896. The Anglo-Egyptian conquest of the Sudan, 1896 to 1899. This is where Churchill was. He attended the University of Edinburgh Medical School, of course. He was a doctor. He was a fascinating man of his time, and he was. He was a very interesting man. This book does a very good job of showing the complexity, the contradictions, and there were a lot of them. He feels his early life dealing with his domineering mother, and his mother was very domineering. She called him ma'am. That was her name. It was a title more than just being polite for his mom. I mean, talented but alcoholic father, his struggles as a young doctor, and his early attempts to be a published author. It wasn't until he created his most famous and mostly hated by him, Sherlock Holmes. first published in 1887 in the Strand, the first Holmes short story, He's Studying Starlet. He had as described in the biography a little. The editor of this thing should be shot. Oh wait, I'm the editor. So I'll have to shoot myself later. He had little success with Sherlock Holmes in the beginning, and Holmes haunted him his whole life. Sherlock Holmes he wanted to be known as a more serious writer of history of stop it. The phone turns off. I don't constantly do it. He wanted to be better well known than just the guy who created Sherlock Holmes. He hated Holmes. He tried to kill off Holmes many, many times. And the public said, I don't think so. We like Holmes. You may not like Holmes, Mr. Doyle, but we like Holmes. So bring him back, or else. It took him a long time to bring him back, by the way. He didn't just come back. It took a while. I mean, his other books were such as Brigadier Gerard, taking place during the Napoleonic Wars. But it didn't have the same effect or interest or value to the reading public as Holmes did. He married Louisa Hawkins in 1885, remained fairly faithful until he met G. Lecky and would marry her in 1907. The biography, I'll get to that. The biography does a good job at detailing their relationship of trying to appear to not be having an affair as Doyle tried to remain loyal to his dying wife, who would die in 1906. They really were trying to keep it from his mom, because if his mom knew, there would be fireworks. I really gotta shoot my editor. Well, the editor needs to be fired, and he needs to be replaced with somebody else more confident than I am. But he did. He tried to be faithful to his wife, who was dying, but they were going. Him and the other woman were going on trips. They weren't making it very secretive that he was having an affair. He wasn't even really trying. He was hoping she would just never find out. The biography does a very good job of demonstrating his underhandedness, his tendency to. He wasn't being faithful. He convinced himself he was being faithful because he was going to wait until she died before marrying. Her name already. Jean. He was trying to be faithful, but I like Jean over here, Mom. I'm sorry. His mom did eventually find out. She tolerated it because, Louisa is kind of dying, Mom. What are we going to do? I like Jean as well. I want to marry her. He doesn't marry her eventually. He would marry her in 1907. Biography does a good job of detailing their relationship, of trying to appear to not be having an affair, as Doyle tried to remain loyal to his dying wife, as I said. It's a good biography of his writing life, public life, and of course his private life. He was served in the Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, South Africa. Via the field hospital, he would write a history of the Second Boer War. He would be knighted because of the, let's just say, not really straightforward history. So let's say, more like a rah-rah kind of thing. The Queen Victoria was pretty much rewarding him for not criticizing the Boer War. He was knighted. He was knighted in 1902. He would write the novel. Where am I? He would write the novel and sequels of Professor Challenger's stories, the Lost World stories. The Lost World stories are the Professor Challenger stories. He really was trying to get Holmes out of his life. So Professor Challenger was the complete opposite of Holmes. The Lost World is probably my favorite book of his. I've read some of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I've read more of the Lost World stories. I do have the Lost World and the other stories to go with that collection. Would begin a 6-volume history of the First World War. The biography does a very good job of detailing and explaining his involvement and defense of spiritualism, and one does get the idea he was becoming rather obsessed with it. He had a friendship with Harry Houdini, as I said, who didn't believe in the afterlife. The biography does a good job of explaining that their friendship and its end. Houdini had exposed several frauds in spiritualism, and Doyle took it personally. He did. Doyle really became obsessed with spiritualism, particularly after several family members died. He took it personally. You did not criticize spiritualism around Mr. Arthur Conan Doyle. You just say yes to it, Mr. Doyle, whatever you say, Mr. Doyle, because he would get angry. And it was probably because he might have had doubts. But he really got entrenched in the belief and just he would write books about it. He did. He wrote a book, The History of Spiritualism. He wrote in 1926. The book really does a great in-depth study. This book, but it does a very good job of showing Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a very human, flawed man. He really believed in his talents. He thought that Sherlock Holmes was getting in the way. He believed in spiritualism to the point of actually literally just cutting off friendships because they didn't agree with him. Because they just would not, they criticized or they found fault or the book does a very excellent job. I think maybe might take him a little too much of the book, maybe. But that's almost like the last 25 years of his life, so it's kind of understandable. I mean, the book he really does an in-depth study of why he became so obsessed with the occult. He did also write a few ghost and horror stories, such as Parasite, which I have read, by the way. It's not bad. It's kind of a vampire story. He was an avid sportsman, loved golf and cricket. The biography as a whole does a very good job of showing Doyle as both hero and not so much a hero at times. But you get the idea that the biography is trying to be fair. Doyle wanted to be taken seriously as a serious writer of history and novels, and his greatest creation, Sherlock Holmes, was his biggest stumbling block to be taken more seriously as a writer. In his mind, he would write fantasy stories, fantasy stories, science fiction, historical, and even horror stories, alone all the non-fiction articles he would pen. A huge part of this biography is taken up with. I need to slow down. That's part of the problem. Why am I rushing? I don't know why I'm talking so fast. A huge part of this biography is taken up with his belief, defense, and writing about spiritualism. I must admit it does at times slow the biography down a bit, but still it holds your attention throughout the book. He was a brilliant writer and a complicated man, and the biography does a good job of showing that about him. Excellent biography. And it does. He did try to be faithful to his wife. And in his mind, he fell in love with this other woman, and was happy with her, but he wasn't going to divorce his first wife, Louisa, because she was dying, and he couldn't do it, and he tried to keep the secret away from his mom, who really was a domineering force in his life. It's a good book. Don't get me wrong, it is a very good book, and he did hate Sherlock Holmes. He created Challenger to be a counterweight to Sherlock Holmes, and it was pretty popular. It made movies about the Lost World. But yeah, he remained married to his second wife. He got very deeply involved in spiritualism, which, as I keep saying, he became obsessed with it. It's almost like it just became it was becoming the most important thing in his life, and he really devoted the last part of his life, certainly the last 25 years, of just defending it and teaching it and getting very annoyed with people who just didn't see it his way. He would get angry. He would lose friendships and upset. He was a complicated man. He was an interesting man, and he was a complicated man. I like how the screen is so much. I need to stop talking. Part of the problem is I do talk fast. I talk fast normally when I'm talking to people, so I'm kind of used to talking fast. I should be, but I don't. He wrote a lot of it. He did write. He wrote his Napoleonic stories. He wrote history. He wrote one play, if I remember correctly, and it bombed. He knew Harry Houdini. Him and Harry Houdini had an odd relationship because he believed in spiritual stuff. Houdini did not. They got along just fine. They did sometimes try to debunk or prove certain mediums were either frauds or not frauds. But it just got to the point where Houdini became more and more convinced that this was a bunch of nonsense, and Doyle just took it personally. Could not could not handle anyone not agreeing with him on this one subject. He he did. He literally would become very belligerent. He was a nice guy, but when you totally brought up spiritualism, he literally became somebody else practically. I think in my mind, interesting guy, very interesting, very good book. I mean, I have read some of the Sherlock Holmes stories. As I've said, I do prefer the Lost World stories. Plus, they're dinosaurs. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is okay. I mean, I can kind of see why he really wanted to kill off Sherlock Holmes and keep him dead. Because he wanted to be taken more seriously as a writer. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is kind of, and if you actually read them, there are some errors in it. And there's incontinuity. Continuity is hard, as somebody says on YouTube. Continuity in the Sherlock Holmes stories does not exist. If you read them, it does not exist. He contradicts himself a lot. They're good detective stories for what they are. But if you actually read them and actually study all the stories, there are some continuity errors. And he just wanted to be taken seriously as a writer. And to him, Sherlock Holmes was nonsense. It was absolute nonsense. He was running out of ideas toward the end. He didn't want to write them anymore. People wanted more. And it irritated him. It frustrated him. He wanted to talk about spiritualism and all these other stories he's read. My head was like, why am I looking sideways? Oh, very strange. A lot of books. But, I mean, as I said, this is a very good book. It's empty, it's big, it's not small, but overall, it does portray a very complicated, stubborn, brilliant writer, but at the same time, don't cross certain lines. Just don't, because he will defriend you. He will literally defriend you. He believed in the fairies, by the way. He really did. He went to his dying day. Despite the fact it was proven all to be a fraud, he still refused to see them as nothing but real. He wanted to see them as real. It didn't matter what anyone told him. But anyway, I liked the book. I found him interesting. I would recommend it because my editor who wrote my notes, he's taken out to the woodshed and slapped around with it. Because his editing is terrible. Or the guy reading it needs to slow down. A little bit of both. Probably a little bit of both. One's a schmuck and the other one's a bigger schmuck. But it's a good book. It is a good book. I would recommend it very highly. I would also recommend reading his stuff. I like how the picture is. I think I figured out what the problem was. I needed more light. Not less light, more light. But thank you for watching, people. I know somebody kept coming on and off while I was talking. I know I guess I wasn't interesting enough for them. It's just fine. But I really do need to slow down. Really do. Or get a better editor. Or both. I think both. Anyway, I do like Sherlock Holmes. I like him. He's not my favorite detective, by the way. He actually isn't. That would be Hercule Poirot of Agatha Christie name. I like Holmes. I like Basil Rathbone Holmes. I like a lot of the Sherlock Holmes movies. But I would recommend this book. I don't know who this person is who keeps coming and going, but they keep coming and going. I think it's funny. I do. Anyway, Like, share, comment, subscribe. Thank you for watching, people. I like the picture. It's so nice. I like the picture. I finally fixed the one thing that was driving me crazy besides everything else. How nice and clear that was. Yeah, you. Now stop talking so fast and get your editor to do his job right. Anyway, behave yourselves, people, because you know I'm not going to. Later, later. Later, later.